what I try to tell myself is that it's this muscle memory of ability to learn, ability to trust, to know when to pull back or when to push forward with adoption of various techniques and tools, and to be able to sort of use these to your advantage. It requires conversations with people who are looking at it from a different angle than you are. Again, your notion about ethics or climate impact, those are all very real. And we should be looking at this from as many different sides as possible, not a sort of monotheistic view of look what it can do for us, but look what it's doing to all of us. And I think that combined with a very specialized approach to how it could save time, even saving 2 or 3 hours a week, week after week after week, is fundamental. That is life-changing. Our ability to change one thing, but to do so with a consistent and stable manner. It's not going to put us all on the couch for the rest of our days, but it may save a couple hours of our day.
Step into the world of success with your brand amplified, the ultimate podcast designed to unravel the intricacies of thriving businesses. I'm your host, Annika Jackson, and I'm on a mission to uncover the stories, strategies, and secrets that have propelled entrepreneurs and business leaders to success. What we're going to talk about today with Nick Cawthon is something that everybody needs to be paying attention to. And that is, how do we make sure that we are doing everything we can to have the right design elements to reach the right people at the right time for our organizations? Nick, I'm so thrilled to have you on to talk about all of these topics, AI, and also shout out to you being a professor. Like, I'm a part-time professor myself, so love that, and love learning about what you're infusing into the students of today as well.
Hey, Annika, thanks for having me on. Good to talk to you.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about you, your background, and how you got into your organization today.
Yeah, my background is, I'll give you the origin story. I was fortunate enough to have parents who nurtured things like visual arts and, arts education from an early age. And, found myself in summer camps somewhere along the way doing drawing exercises. And I remember one aftercare program where the den mother, I say that because I think it was Boy Scouts, sat 8 of us down at a table, probably just to keep us quiet for 20 minutes, gave us a bunch of pens and paper and told us to keep quiet and draw for a little bit. And I remember the deep dive that I took really kind of intensely, wanting to produce something in the time that I had, and pulling my head back up out of that exercise and feeling like, wow, this is, came out like I wanted it. I had a really good sense of a flow state, that concept of really the way that time can shift when you embed yourself into a hyper-focused task. For those of us that might be a little scatterbrained. And that sense of accomplishment and feeling was something that I really tapped into, and I still remember it 40 years later. That notion of, wow, this isn't bad. And if I had to do this for 20 minutes or 2 weeks during summer, like, that's something I wouldn't mind spending more time doing, is exploring how to express yourself visually. And the medium's changed from pencil to, what turned out to be a keyboard and a display. There were times where it was drafting paper and vellum and using drafting and architectural supplies before computer-aided design took over. And it always was, so how do I get myself to express in the best manner possible visually? And like I referred to earlier, that medium is changing quite a bit. Going to university at the University of Oregon, coming back to the Bay Area in 2000 with a degree in graphic design, in applied arts, and having been fortunate enough to have had my fingers on keyboards, given that Silicon Valley is in our backyard and Apple Computer was very formative in the mid-'80s to school children who were understanding what these computers did for the first time. And then returning back from school in what this upswing of a new economy with the Yahoos and the Excite-at-Homes and the later on Googles were all sort of burgeoning as new companies, as a new form of media. And so I just appropriated those design skills into now interaction and software and screens. And now I feel like there's a similar wave of transformation happening with these new wave of companies replacing the old guard, and the medium is changing. It's maybe not as graphical or as browser based now. It's a lot of text and structure, and that is something that I'm excited about. And I would love to talk with you more about any of those things along the way.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a little overlap in terms of I lived in San Francisco from about 1999 to 2004, but I was working at Future US on the magazine side. So I was just looking through to see if you ever worked there on any of our magazines, our computer or video game magazines, but the answer is no,
Yep.
sadly.
And
But we
when
may
you
have crossed
started
paths.
as when I was getting a Bachelor of Fine Arts, there was a decision. Are you graphic design for graphic design, or are you
Yeah.
graphic design for this, quote, new media?
Mhm.
And that new media was delivered on CD-ROMs and discs. It wasn't quite accessible over the phone lines because, again, DSL wasn't yet around. And I took the latter path of graphic design for new media, and it took all the skills of hierarchy and typography and photography and balance and composition, and now applied it to these 640 by 480 pixel screens. And so that was again, as design extends itself, those were some very clear paths 25 years ago of which one could take.
Well, there's a lot of discussion these days on SEO, LLM search, generative search, and the fact that what you have for your on-page SEO is still really important, but you can get people there by using those techniques, but then you have to have great design and make it really easy for customers or potential customers or clients to find out how to make a purchasing decision and get the information they want. And when I do these kind of exercises for myself or for my students or my own websites, it's shocking to me the number of big brands that we all know that still make it really difficult to make a purchase. And so I'd love to hear a little bit about what you're seeing in the market and, you know,
Where that goes. Yeah,
yeah.
I wonder, are we designing for humans anymore? On the fringes are these agents that are performing these transactions where you and I can speak to a bot and say, book me some movie tickets for Friday night at 7:30. And there used to be a time in which we would type that into our desktop screen and bring it up and click and do it. And then there was a time maybe around 2010 in which that was all on a mobile device, and it became easier and easier to do it when the thought crossed your mind. And now I don't think you're going to be turning on a device anymore. You're going to speak into a voice assistant, and the agent is going to go and translate that for you. Or those things that are really pretty straightforward. A movie at a certain time at a certain location. And as you mentioned, SEO or optimizing for LLMs, I think the same is true with agents. These are the things that are on the fringes right now. They're not commonplace, but they are occurring. And there are companies that are more and more adopting. And we saw those Google sort of robotic, let me do a human-like voice to try to make a restaurant reservation for you. And that's awkward. And, the reaction to that can be very triggering. But we're also seeing these autonomous browsers that know what the buy now button looks like and that know how to fill out a form. And I think that the standardization and the use of design pattern libraries has really sort of made that all a very systematic way of accomplishing the task. So my advice to anybody's listening that has some of those transaction-based businesses to look at what it means to make it, quote, easy to use, not only for humans, but also for some of the agents and algorithms that will begin to be more and more a portion of your user base. Again, don't even know who I'm designing for anymore. Is it the humans or is it the robots?
Yeah. And I would argue that those of us who live in the more tech AI world, we're talking this language. I'm so excited to have agents running all of the appointments that I keep forgetting to make, right? The real life stuff, the dentist appointment for my daughter or whatever, or scheduling the oil change or whatever the case may be. And then getting to the point of, what kind of clothes I like to buy, my sizes, go ahead and I need a shirt in this color, this style, show me a couple options, purchase for me. I'm really excited about that time. But the reality is there are still, most of my friends and family are not using AI yet. And so this is important for us to think about as entrepreneurs, as people who work in business, as people are teaching the next generation of digital media marketers, advertisers, designers. How long do you think it's going to be for us to be able to make that change to getting everybody else comfortable enough with AI that this is their reality?
we're coming up on Thanksgiving. I'm not sure when this podcast is going to be released, but it is in the fall right now, and it is sweater weather and pumpkin latte season here in the Bay Area. And we can look ahead to Thanksgiving when we're with our relatives of this use of, quote, AI, which has been around for a long time. It's been around for 10 years, like the chat assistants helping you navigate support documentation on a company's website. Yeah, that's all sort of models and language models that we just had in our ubiquity for some time, but now we branded it into this scary term of AI. And I am interested to see what people do with it, where I have friends who use it for cocktail recipes or use it for a friend or an assistant, like really has a much deeper emotional back and forth sort of fluent conversation with a voice assistant, giving its fears and hopes and aspirations to it. And then from my standpoint, it's a productivity tool where I can go further, I can go broader than I ever had before. Now, whether or not the quality is the same as me actually learning, in the case of code bases and sort of developmental tools, that is all going to be proven right or wrong fairly quickly. But I think that what I would want to sort of refer to, especially as we've mentioned education, is the curiosity to see what it can and cannot do, is to go behind some hype cycles and some of the fear cycles and the triggering aspects of it and see what it can do. I want to also go back to the year 2000 when I had a teacher, Martin Vanesky, and he was so big on tactical tools and tactical methods of image making, stamping and ripping and burning and tearing and that sort of tortured aspect of imperfection. And he was a magazine publisher, and he was wonderful to watch at this time in which technology in early 2000s was really starting to, as we mentioned, replace graphic design as we knew it, with the typesetting and the leading and the kerning and all those things. And now it is all just fingers on keyboard. And what Professor Vanesky made you realize is that you can still do these methods of tactical image making and then begin to see, how can I scale this? How can I scan and publish and do the things that computers are good at, but still not lose touch with the craft and the self-examination that comes with forming a product or an image or a brand or a design in general.
Yeah. So one of the things that we're also seeing, and I appreciate, with this will come out before Thanksgiving, so I appreciate your nod to
2025.
fall weather 2025, yes. And those are conversations I'm sure we'll be having. And one thing that I've, because I'm not a designer, right? I work with designers, but one thing that I've heard also is that the move is going to be towards not having websites, towards just having apps. And then I think that might be the first transition for most people, and then the transition to agents just doing it all for us. So what are you seeing in your world working with, and as a designer, working with engineers, ethnographers, data scientists to make sure that all of the design is there? Are you seeing the shift away from websites into apps, or is it still kind of early days?
Apps, websites are so, there was a time in which you got paid a good salary to build websites for people, brochures, online brochure called brochureware, where you know how they look. And now you can do that in 30 seconds through a prompt and an application that gets built for you to assimilate what a charcuterie company in San Francisco might want to display. Really, that is the electric bicycle feeling of generative tools, where like, wow, it would have taken me weeks to get to this point, and now it's there. And so I think that's always going to be there, the branding, the name recognition, the domain. But it's those other tasks of a customer experience where you need to integrate now reservation systems and CRMs and payroll and all the finances. It's all that wiring that goes behind these companies that, again, AI has been so good at figuring out. There's been SaaS companies, think take Calendly, or in my case, form processing that generates PDFs and does analysis. And that's now all able to be understood, deployed, and hosted on your own. So those low-level SaaS apps that were used to be very good at doing one thing, in the case of Calendly, like looking at your calendar, presenting open times, and then booking that. That's something that, again, for those of us who are in a low-code or no-code environment, those are things that are not far away from being achievable. And you think, well, how much did I spend per month on this tool? On something like Calendly, okay, well, it's between 10 and $20, and now I've got a cost savings of $200, $300 a year, and then you multiply that towards however many of these SaaS applications. We're taking $10 a month. We're doing one thing. That again, if you just give the integrations to some of these algorithms or some of these tools, they can often do those things for you. So going back to your question about the websites and websites versus apps and what that kind of balance is, I think there's always going to be a need to be reputable, to be online, to be referenceable. That's never going to go away in terms of our online presence, our online brand. I am of the knowledge that what we used to do was link backs and keyword mining, and we would have very obvious techniques, robots.txt, we would have meta tags, we would have all of these methods for which to increase our SEO. And now those metrics are changing. And part of the reason I'm having conversations like this is because I'm trying to feed an algorithm. I'm trying to have referenceable text, which is automatically transcribed. And as you post to however many platforms this podcast is on, it's going to be something that starts to seed. And I think it's much better to do so in the natural language that you and I are speaking than into something that's a little bit more programmatic with how we're trying to find people like us. And so it's also great to be able to talk with people about these things and expand networks and understand the connections that we have with one another. But as a brand leader, I would recommend being very forward about how you're contributing new and interesting and innovative and unique content to this thing that we call the sphere of index. So yeah, that's I know that was a long answer to a very distinct question, but that's where I'm heading with brand and the web.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that because what I'm hearing, and I think this is what I'm also preaching to people, is that people still want to work ultimately with people they know, like, and trust. Going back to the basics, that they know what your values are, that they know you're a real human, flawed,
Very flawed.
perfect, whatever, all the
Yeah,
things,
fundamentally flawed.
yeah, behind the brand. And so that part, we're still going to need our humanness. We're still going to need this connection. I don't think, it would be boring for me to listen to my agent talk to your agent and try to come up with the same kind of connection and questions, because
I
it
think
would. Yeah,
that's what the job application cycle is these days, is that you used AI to create the job description and I used AI to fill out my resume. And now our algorithms are just talking to one another about, am I a match for this job or not? It must be really hard being in HR right now. It must be very hard trying to find full-time work. A friend of mine made a joke that's kind of resonated with me. In this town, in San Francisco, it's easier to come up with a company and receive $2 million investment, which will pay you as a founder $150,000 a year to see if this idea will come up, than to find a full-time job, which will also pay you $150,000 a year doing something in AI. It's better just to make something up and get paid to succeed or fail than it is to go and work for somebody else who's already done that process. Yeah. And so, yeah, I think that the job market's really scary because our algorithms are talking to one another and there's not that human connection.
Yeah, I haven't really thought about it that way before. But and I think one of the other things we're seeing is that we need to upskill workers at a much quicker pace. We need to fill those jobs that we do need. Translators, right? A lot of other jobs that aren't being filled right now because people don't know about them. People don't think they have access to learn how to do them. So there's a whole bunch there. I think we've probably hit on at least 5-6 tangents that we could go off on right now. But I wanted to ask, because I was just at the AI conference in San Francisco. In August, I went to AI4. AI4's conversation was around singularity, also around education and AI and the integration needed there. But it was really not just singularity, but about people and robots working hand in hand and forming a partnership. So, that is taking it past the point where we're looking at it now, where we have goals for our organizations, our companies, ourselves. We use these different tools to help us reach those goals, do some research, find out some other information, make our workflows faster, better, easier. But the machine doesn't have the same goal as we do as a human. At AI4, I went to the AI Alliance the night before, and it was a lot of people who are coders and developers talking about agents and how they're not perfect and getting really granular. So I thought it was really interesting how different the conversations are. And you live in San Francisco, obviously. You hear all these conversations every day. So from the kind of inside baseball, where do you see that the issue, like what are we working on right now? And what do people who are not in one of those major tech hubs working in it every day need to be thinking about for their organizations?
Yeah. I'll go back to the electric bicycle metaphor.
Yeah.
Is that we've sort of given ourselves this augmented ability to go faster. We can also direct ourselves further away in the wrong direction, or because now your range has exponentially increased, you can find yourself down a path that you're not quite sure where you're going. And as somebody who used to commute on an electric bicycle, there was also this very real scenario of it breaks, where I've gone down this path and now my bicycle doesn't work anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't really know how to fix it. So that curiosity of what is it doing? What is actually happening here? Where is it making mistakes, and how can I identify how to fix it? Because it's easy to be entranced with the speed. It's easy to think that this technology is going to get us to a better place. But at the cost of not being able to analyze what the output is, and at the cost of, did it take me in the right direction? So those are some things that I always keep in the back of my mind. And to not be entranced by the allure of the acronym, to know that it's good at very specific things in repetition. It's not good at hand waving and making problems going away, because it often makes more problems than it does solve. But if there are isolated tasks that we find ourselves repeating over and over and over again, that is something that it can assist with. I heard a quote about, this is going to, I'm sorry for the lack of attribution and just the generalization of it, but the adoption at enterprise level is one thing, because Copilot's installed in your Office suite, and that's great, and you can ask it. I've found mixed luck with Gemini in the G Suite of trying to fulfill spreadsheets or do tasks of any real depth and importance. But the ability to have a assistant that has context for what it is that's being asked of it on a daily or weekly basis, so it can help you at a better rate than if it was starting from scratch. I think that adoption on the enterprise level isn't there yet. We've turned on this one widget and expect it to solve things, when it's no faster than a search engine. But it's when we begin to train our own models to have our own context, because we can now inform it, hey, I do this task every day or every week. Can you make this faster for me based upon what you heard last week? I think that's when you start to see improvements. So in recap, it's being very specific about things that a generative tool might assist with, whether it be analysis or writing or whatever it might be. It's saying, I want it to do just this one thing. And to be able to position yourself or your organization into a subscription package or into some sort of suite of which it can now learn from and remember where it made mistakes last time, so that the next time you're asking it to do something, it improves its response, or else you're just going to be banging your head against the wall and thinking this isn't working or this isn't good enough. Yeah. So yeah, that's my advice for those who are not drinking the Kool-Aid as heavily as we are here in the world's favorite city.
Yeah. So it really is about, you can't just provide the tools to your teams. You have to give enough time for people to learn how to use them and train them. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we're seeing in adoption, is people have access to all these things, but it's not, like you said, you don't just turn it on and all of a sudden it's working perfectly. You still have to train the models.
And there should be an amnesty where it's not like we're cheating at work. If you use one of these tools, that you do so with transparency, that you do so with acceptance of, it's okay to use these to do your job better. However, we need to have some mentorship program. We need to have some sharing and documentation that you're bringing in these tools, classic change management principles, so that all of us can benefit. And it's not just you being able to save 5 hours a week from the tasks that you do in repetition. And that, as you described that notion of how do humans and robots work with one another, it's really how do humans and humans work with one another? How do we share the knowledge? For those of us who may be more technically literate, how do we start to do education programs and change the organizational fears and really begin to multiply our ability to learn and do things? There's a county down the way. I've been going into civic and government organizations to try to slow down some of my contract cycles, because those tend to be longer. They're harder to get, but they last longer. And there was one around town halls and forums where they were looking for a contractor to be able to conduct these things, especially since the county of San Mateo has 5 official languages that it needs to support. And you mentioned translators. And one of the mandates of working with the county is that if you offset a task that was normally given to a human being, you need to retrain or accommodate for the loss of that role. So as somebody who would find a translator for a subcontractor typically, and now can run these through a translation algorithm, what do I do with that job role? And the answer is they go in and they edit and they figure out how to post, and they understand all the workflow process that comes with the noise that maybe auto-translate creates. But now they're not sitting there and typing in real-time translation. They're now managing the translation process. And so I like that as from San Mateo County, where a lot of these companies are founded in, to sort of acknowledge that, hey, there are those who are going to be left behind by this wave. So let's make sure that we reach down and pick them up again and give them upskilled, retrained jobs so that they can manage that process as good as anybody.
Yeah, I applaud that, because now, of course, we have YouTube allowing us to share content in multiple languages, even if you don't speak it. If you're then getting responses back from people in that language, are you going to get the translation and be able to write an answer in that language? We have, of course, the new AirPods coming out. But then there is a specific translator that's still needed, which is the one that can translate the C-suite to the developers, coders, engineers, and vice versa, to make sure that all of the company's goals and strategies are being accomplished with two groups that may not speak the same language and may not have the same goal in mind, right? But all need to be working together so that the company can continue, can make more money, can do more good, and make sure that all of these people in this ecosystem continues to thrive. And what I'm hearing is that there aren't enough of that kind of translator either. So that's a whole other, how do we train people up to understand that role? Because you have to understand two very different, disparate sides.
Yeah. It's an interesting time in the workplace, especially for those of us in digital product development, where now the designers and the developers and the PMs are all in the same tool. We're all using the same chat to generate our artifacts. And when you typically had divisions where maybe in a different room or a different building or a different location, the quote product managers lived. And the same thing's true with the designers, and the same thing's true with the developers. And there were silos and handoffs and cascading responsibilities. And now we're all in the same pool. And that's going to be, when I describe that charcuterie, I'm going to say that word fast 5 times. When I describe that charcuterie company, where now all of a sudden you had the PM, the developer, and the designer all within the power of a prompt, was able to create this thing. When that is now scaled to the organizational level, how does the CEO decide, we don't need so many designers anymore, we don't need as many developers anymore? Well, the PM's job is going to be defined by a README document of which the algorithm is going to listen to say the priorities of this company are A, B, and C, our revenue sources are D, E, and F, and therefore give me a product that uses this. To be able to use a guidance document to make, large decisions from an organization, to be the CEO. I think that it's a recipe for disaster. But we're just looking at the vulnerabilities of things that we don't think we know, and that we can create agents or bots to help us with that decision-making process.
Yeah. One of the things that your company Engage does is market and experience research. Of course, there are AI tools. You can put in your brand, your idea. It'll spit out, here are some potential customer personas. Here's your competitive set. Some, overarching data, not necessarily very specific to your company. So I'd love to hear a little bit about why is it still important to do our own validation, our own research, and not just believe what happens. I mean, we know this for prompts and, the sea of sameness that you hear about for captions and written content sometimes, but I'd love to hear your take on the research side and really understanding who our customer is and how we're going to best reach them, communicate with them, solve their problems.
I want to acknowledge the phrase sea of sameness. I think that was a beautiful description of, I think, what most of us know the output is. We can tell a charcuterie site that's been auto-generated because it looks like every other one. There really isn't that connection. So let's keep with that analogy. Let's roll with that. Let's slice that ham. If we understand, some of the advantages to why our customers want something like this. In my case, it was a global study for electronic arts on a video game that was just released last week. A skateboarding video game, a rehash of an early 2000s title. And we looked at skating cultures in 7 different countries around the world. And we found out these nuances and the divisions and the similarities between them. And that start to become storytelling. And I don't think that we're ever going to get past the human nature of storytelling to draw out emotions. One of the things that was so evident was because the advisory for electronic arts was on their commerce platform. It's a free-to-play game, and they're going to make all their money in their e-commerce store. And so they wanted to understand how different cultures shopped and where that skate culture would find boundaries or lines in how traditionally as a counterculture, how they decided to buy things. And this notion of tortured came about where, because skating is such a rough activity, just think about like the feet on the grip tape and the sandpaper that's on top of the skateboard so your feet don't fall off, and the crashes and the bangs and the graffiti and the asphalt. Like it is, very tortured is not the right word, but it's something that's very rough. And it's also a badge of pride for skaters, where you can tell the good skaters by the way that their shoes look. You can tell what type of skateboarding they do by the scuff marks on their shoes. On the toe, it is a vert skater, and on the side, it's a street skater. So as you look at a skater's shoes, you know what style of skating they do. And there were these funny examples of luxury brands that would put duct tape around the shoes to refer to the method in which skaters use to just stay maintainable. And I don't think you find those kinds of insights or reflection by typing in questions of skate culture, again, because you're dipping into the sea of sameness. Insights are just that. They're insightful. They're not rehashing of the things that we already know. It's a very common reaction for researchers when they present to have their constituents say, yeah, we already knew that. So if you're able to find out those emotional, those kind of reflections of research, I think that's where you start to shine.
That was a really great example. I could visualize the entire time you're talking about the skateboard, the scuffs, as a
Yeah.
child, as a Gen Xer who used to read the skate zines and wear the
Yeah.
clothes. So,
Yeah. The first athlete to ever get a shoe contract was Michael Jordan. And then within 6 months, Natas, I think was the skater's name, and Satan spelled backward, was the second athlete ever to get a professional school shoe contract. And that sort of merging between streetwear and skatewear, and that relationship between shoes and apparel and Nike as a brand, and it's such an interesting history of a cult culture, especially as my younger son is really getting into skateboarding and finding out what that means to be.
yeah, nice. Now I just can't stop thinking about skating and eating charcuterie.
Yeah, that's right. I'm within arm's distance of both. Justin Herman Plaza is just to my left, and the fatted calf charcuterie is within my sight right now here in the Ferry Building.
I want to turn the conversation a little bit to what you are doing currently as an adjunct professor and how that's evolved as well.
Yeah, I came off of a contract with a Fortune 100 company out of New York, financial services, and entered into what is the traditional design and development process, where the designer goes into Figma, does a bunch of mock-ups. They come up with some components that may not exist. That goes into a design review, takes a couple of weeks, puts into a queue, goes back and revises, revises, gets approved, and gets handed off to the front-end development team, who do the same thing, who say, okay, we're going to take this component and we're going to build it in React, and we're going to make sure it integrates and that passes the validation test. And at that point, you can use it on your application.
Yeah.
And with the role of a consultant, I had my badge and my email address and was able to go and clone their front-end code base and use that as a language model for which to develop, in our case, prototypes for applications using the same version of React, using the same version of Tailwind, and all of the code compliance that they needed to do production level code. And it was a rejection of a design and development process. My goal was to get a prototype in front of our users as fast as possible because, again, I had a short-term contract and I needed to validate ideas, make sure that we were going through user-centric methods so that it met the need of the client. But what I burned was the design team and a lot of these junior to mid designers whose job it was to do design operations, to make sure that the Figma files were correct and that the components all mapped to where they needed to go. And so I acknowledged that, and I had a fear that these are my people. These are the people that I've been for the past 20-something years, is a staff designer and interaction design. And now I'm challenging that by saying, well, I can just do it all with strokes of a keyboard. And so where I've been shifting is to try to address these mid-career professionals. And as we described the translator at the County of San Mateo, is to understand what some of their barriers might be in terms of adoption at their organization or themselves personally. And I've created an assessment survey so that they can examine that this is how I feel. These are things that we've done to adopt. These are my outputs. And again, it's free to fill out. And the output is where you compare against similar size organizations, those within your industry, similar size teams, and you'll get a sort of spectrogram of here's where we're strong or here's where we're weak. Because I think that retraining and that understanding of design principles as they adopt new tools is going to be imperative as those graduates of university programs are going to come out to the job field. The good news is that nobody's done any of this before. It's like graduating school in 2000, like maybe you or I did, somewhere around there, is that there's not going to be the industry vet that has had their hands on these tools for 10 or more years, and that you're just begging to learn how to use it because nobody's used these workflows, these tools, and we're all brand new at this. And so the fastest mover is going to be the one that wins, and the fastest movers are usually the younger generation that's more technology adept. So how that translates back into a university curriculum, it's to be able to understand, to visualize, and to use data in ways that maybe aren't typically familiar with designers, but is something that we need to have that literacy going forward.
I appreciate that. It's the same thing that I'm seeing where our programs were created before everybody started talking about generative AI and before we had access to all these other tools that have been built. But if you're going to be in digital social media or digital media management or any kind of career like that, you have to understand a little bit about everything. So, and students in my programs, some of them have been told, an undergraduate, don't use any AI at all for your work. Some are embracing it more, but a lot of times I find that in the master's program, I am one of the ones who's introducing it to them and saying, hey, instead of doing a 2-color, table, why don't you do a Pixton cartoon to represent the information and what's ethical and unethical about the way that you're collecting data, or whatever the case may be, just to get them to try things in a fun way so that they have that knowledge. And then most of the time they end up exploring other things and finding other tools that they can use. And so I think you're right on. And this is why education is still important in this world where we hear so many things happening around education. Do you still need to go to university? Do you need to get a master's degree? Is that going to be funded or not? I think there is still a lot of value in that. And from learning from someone like yourself who has seen the ecosystem change and transition.
Yeah, it's saying that you don't know. And it's our role as teachers and as parents is to show what's possible. I love that you're introducing the ethics of data, especially relevant today with intellectual property and with what's creating
Absolutely.
these algorithms. And that kind of reflection discussion is worth any program. I think it teaches you not just to be about the technique, but to understand the method as a whole. And that levels you up in any conversation you might have.
Yeah, 100%. So you did say that you have assessments. People can go to retrain.gauge.io
Yeah,
and
that's correct.
see if they're ready for AI adoption, which is amazing.
And this is for UX and design teams, product teams as well. But I think anybody that fills it out will start to understand there's 5 different categories and what are the aspects and where that might be. Again, it's free. It doesn't cost a thing. So it might be a good 5 minutes of your time just to see how we're starting to think about retraining or adopting these new tools, especially if you're in the world of application development or brand development. I think those are all very relevant.
Mhm. Fantastic. What is the one piece of advice you would give besides if you're looking at UX and product design, take the free assessment to anyone who is already in business? Maybe their business is, still in the early stages, 5 to 7 years. They
Yeah.
haven't really started dipping their toe in the adoption phase. Where do they need to start?
I mean, think about where we were 25 years ago. There were companies that didn't adopt, quote, the internet. And at times they found themselves painted into a corner where it was too late for them to transform or to pivot. And there are some like restaurants that are gleefully left behind where everything's written on a napkin and there's no digital process in place. And I know we kind of use this buzzword of digital transformation, but that's really what it was, is we went from pen and paper to spreadsheets and applications. There was another wave 10 years after that of mobile phones. We mentioned it about buying movie tickets earlier in our conversation, where all of a sudden it was mobile first, where everything was now going to be thought of as a process that you could do with one hand and one thumb. And that there were companies that saw that, recognized it, and used it as a differentiator, used it as a way to leap ahead where they could now do a better experience on a different device than anybody. And there were issues with that. It required a whole new paradigm of thinking about user experience and thinking about the design process. And then there was this notion of cloud, where we had those who trusted the icon on their desktop of the file that they knew or thought their data was stored in. And that to put that data somewhere else in this amorphous cloud was bringing up issues around privacy, trust, transparency, and that was hard for some to adopt to. I work with some of these people who need to have a file on their desktop, and that really constrains them to the Microsoft Office suite, where now everything is spreadsheets and Office documents, and they don't have the adoption of SaaS platforms because, again, there's the fear or the issues around trust in the cloud. And now I think we're at this fourth wave of transformation where we're now looking at the same issues of trust and transparency and privacy and all that with this blinking cursor. And to what I try to tell myself is that it's this muscle memory of ability to learn, ability to trust, to know when to pull back or when to push forward with adoption of various techniques and tools. And to be able to sort of use these to your advantage, it requires conversations with people who are looking at it from a different angle than you are. Again, your notion about ethics or climate impact, those are all very real. And we should be looking at this from as many different sides as possible, not a sort of monotheistic view of look what it can do for us, but look what it's doing to all of us. And I think that combined with a very specialized approach to how it could save time, even saving 2 or 3 hours a week, week after week after week, is fundamental. That is life changing. Our ability to change one thing, but to do so with a consistent and stable manner. It's not going to put us all on the couch for the rest of our days, but it may save a couple hours of our day. And who wouldn't want that ability to think and free up and strategize more. So that's where it's sort of mitigating some of the hype cycles, but also trying to be very directive about how we might use these technologies.
Yeah, fantastic. And Nick, do you have a favorite quote, mantra, poem, verse, family motto?
Oof, specialization is for insects.
Okay.
I don't know. Again, my attribution is so bad.
I haven't
Somebody
heard
said
that
that.
one though, but I do appreciate that because there have been times in my life where I haven't been able to get jobs because I wasn't specialized enough,
Mhm.
and times when people found my skill set valuable because I can sprinkle a few different things that I've done and knowledge that I have now. So specialization is for insects. Is that correct?
That is correct. Well,
Okay.
it may not be correct, but it's inspirational.
It's fantastic. Well, this has been a really insightful conversation. I really appreciate your time today. And I know that I got a lot out of it. I got some validations for some things I'd been thinking about, but also learned some new things. I have tools that I'm going to be sharing with colleagues and students because we do have some classes where students go through UI and UX design and think about developing. So, we'll have to have conversations about that separately. But I really appreciate your time. And I know that everything that you've said has given everybody who's listening or watching this episode a lot to think about in this new era. So thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you for having me on. Look forward to talking again.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening or watching to this episode of Your Brand Amplified. Don't forget to leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And if you want to learn more, check us out at yourbrandamplified.com.